Listen to this one. 60 picks, tension tools, extractors, top grain zipper case, $148. There's only one problem though. They won't sell to me and they won't sell to you. Hello, I am Eddie the Wire. This is my workshop. 10 years ago I couldn't get a set of picks for love or money. I called everybody. I tried using every trick I knew, but no lockpicks. Couldn't get them. So I went down to my workshop and I started producing my own lockpicks. And then we brought out the Eddie the Wire series. 1, this was so good we brought out 2, and then we brought out 3. It's been good to me. And we brought out 4, and we're still going strong. In a workshop like this, you can produce picks that are of better quality than anything you can buy. And we will show you in the video how to find and purchase the stock, what tools you'll need, how to do the grinds, how to work, how to make tools, handles, cases, diamond picks, snake picks, lifters, everything you'll need to produce a high quality pick. We should also mention that lockpicks are only commercially available. That means that unless you are a licensed and bonded and insured locksmith, or you're a law enforcement agent, you cannot get a commercial lockpick set. I have had locksmiths actually come to me and want to buy tools because the tools that we produce in the shop here and that you will learn to produce are of higher quality than you can buy. The average commercial locksmith set that you might see on TV is usually stamped out of cheap, low-grade carbon steel. Not at all what we use. We use, in fact, what they call in the industry feeler gauge stock or shim stock. This is available at just about all industrial supply stores. It comes in a variety of thicknesses, 12 inches long, ½ inch wide. It's inside this little envelope, as you can see, to prevent it from rusting. This is .030 thick, which means it's 30/1000 of an inch thick. I've got a micrometer here that I can use to check that, although I know by looking at the package that that's what it is. When you use your micrometer, by the way, keep your little finger inside the frame so you don't drop it. That's an expensive fall. 30/1000 is about as thick as you want to go. Now we can take this piece of shim stock, and if it's too big, if it just won't go into the lock keyway, here's a 30/1000 inch finished pick. This is a rake pick. If this just will not give me enough working space in the keyway, I can either stone it down or grind it down and then stone polish it later on to give me exactly the feel I want. That's what's nice about making your own picks. You can modify the pick to match an individual lock. That way you'll always get the right feel you need. You can feel each individual pin. You are the master. If you don't like the tool that you're using, change it. Shim stock is available. Also from the Starrett company. Starrett produces a lot of machine tools, and they also produce shim stock as well. In a pinch, notice I'm using this for a bookmark, you can use a hacksaw blade. It's about the right thickness, it's the right shape, the right size, almost identical to the shim stock. It's not as good steel, it's not tempered as well, and you'll have to cut the teeth off a little bit and generally fool around with it a lot more than you would fine quality shim stock, but in a pinch you can use this as well. Available at any whatever local hardware store. In addition, for making tension wrenches, you'll want to get some round music wire. They call it music wire, but you can't get it at a music store. You have to go to a hobby supply store for this. It comes in a length twice as long as this, and this piece here mics out to about 75, 85, 91 thousandths of an inch, which is pretty close to what you'll want. When you make a tension wrench, you'll grind 2 flats on the end of this, form it into a X shape, or rather an L shape like this, and insert that in the keyway. Here you can see the tension wrench, and as I insert it in the keyway, you can see that I get a nice loose fit. You can grind the wrench to give it either a very tight jam fit or a very springy loose fit, depending on your style of picking. The American style tends to go with the loose, sloppy fit, and you can just put a little tension on it. The Europeans prefer a very form-fitting wrench that you almost have to drive into the lock. They say that this will give you a better pin feel, but each to his own. You can cut one of each and decide which one you want to use. Now, as well as stock, you need tools. You don't need a lot of tools. As a matter of fact, this is not my full set, but I've stripped the workbench down so we can concentrate on just the bare essentials. You'll need, of course, a bench grinder, and I'll pull this one over so you can see it. Having the light is nice. And, of course, you need a wheel to go on the grinding machine. Whatever you do, buy a quality grinding wheel. Don't settle for a cheap imitation. The grinding wheel, if it breaks up, will cause you a lot of damage, so make sure it's a quality wheel. And also make sure that you use a soft wheel. The rule is always a soft wheel for a hard piece of steel. It sounds just exactly the opposite of what you might think, but that's how we do it. And a soft wheel is required for the extremely hard stock that you'll be grinding. It doesn't matter whether it's a fine wheel or a coarse wheel, just as long as it's soft. And in addition to having stock and a grinding wheel, you'll need a marking and measuring device to put layout lines on the stock. I use this general protractor. Not only does it do angles so that you can match the angle of the key you'll be using as a template to cut the pick, it also doubles as a handy-dandy depth gauge. So I can take the key and measure exactly how far it is from the key stop to the tip, and that will tell me how much working area of the pick I'll need. These are very nice, and they come from a variety of manufacturers. Once I lock this, then I've got my angle set. I can also match the angle of the key bitting with this device as well. And when you're working on a very small angle right at the end of a very small diamond pick, having a large marking device like this is invaluable. Strongly suggest you invest in one of these. It may cost you a little bit more, but it's well worth it. To put dye on the pick stock so that you can tell where the mark out lines are, we use regular toolmaker's ink. This is the spray-on version. It also comes in a brush-on version. Either version is fine. As I'll be showing you later on, you just put a very light mist coat onto the stock, and that will allow you to scribe all of the mark out lines you'll need. To mark the layout lines on the stock, once the tool ink has dried, you can use just about anything, ranging from a simple finishing nail to an awl to a regular toolmaker's scriber, which is what this is. This is even the deluxe version. It's got the carboid point. The nice thing about this is that it's extremely sharp, comes to a perfect point, and you can get into the inside of the template that you're using to trace the layout lines. That way your line will be much smaller and your grinding will be more accurate. For our finishing, after you've done the rough grinding, a set of needle files like these are excellent. Sometimes these are also called die maker's files. They come in a variety of shapes, and they're invaluable for getting into the tight corners that some snake picks or wavy picks have to finish right down to the line. Once you finish down to the line, you'll want to polish your pick. Commercial picks, when they come from the die, have wire edges on them from being punched, and they're very rough. You can often take a commercial pick, put it into the lock, and feel that wire edge as it's grinding away on the pins. You can't do a smooth rake with a wire edge pick. So once you've done rough grinding your pick, you want to stone it to get rid of that fine edge and get down to a very polished surface. I use two types of stone. This is a bench stone, and the pick is rubbed along the edge. I'll show you how to do that a little later on too. But in addition, I also use what they call a slip gouge. This is produced for sculptors or people who are sharpening tools with a curved edge, gouges, chisels, the like. And this curved edge is also good for getting in to the fine areas, just like the die maker's files do as well. So you can stone down to an extremely nice velvety finish, and your pick will operate very smoothly. You'll be able to do rake picking as well as individually feeling the pin tumblers without having that wire edge get in your way. This is a Starrett micrometer, but you can purchase one from any retail Sears outlet, and they are really very inexpensive. You can also use a vernier caliper. They cost just about as much, but they're just as accurate again too. Or if you wish to, you can get by with a ruler and the feel of the pick in the lock. In addition to the measuring devices that I've looked at, there is one absolutely essential piece of equipment that you have to have. What is this thing? This is a grinding wheel dresser. You may have to hunt a little bit to find one. It's not a common piece of equipment. Most well-stocked industrial supplies are going to carry this, though. While you're there at the industrial supply picking up the grinding wheel dresser, you can probably also get the feeler shim stock as well, and the carbide scribe, which is probably not available at your local mom and pop hardware, and the die grinder's files, the needle files as well. The wheel dresser I'll show you later on, but briefly what we're going to do is literally profile the wheel so that the wheel will do most of the work for you and cut the profile of the pick. That way you won't have to do a lot of cleanup with the slower file. There is one other file that I use, two actually. This is a regular locksmith's double cut pippin file. Don't ask me what that means, but it's a very fine file that you can use to do filing after you've done the grinding. And I also have this file. You can't see it too well on the video, but this has a safe edge ground on it. Find a file with a safe edge, so you'll have to make one of your own. As you can tell by looking at the sparks, I'm producing a lot of high carbon sparks, and the file is getting a smooth edge on it. Now, why do you want a smooth edge? Very simple. If you're going to cut a lockpick, you want to get into and cut this edge, but not that edge, you need a safe-edged file. Probably your first grinding wheel assignment should be to take one of your regular mill files and grind a safe edge on it so you can get a feel for how the grinding wheel operates and avoid getting caught by the wheel and causing problems. Two more pieces of equipment I want to talk about. You need a torch for heating up the wire rod to do your tension wrenches. From Sears, again, you can get this wide-based propane. The little tall skinny ones are pretty unstable and they tend to fall over when you least expect it, providing you with a nice hot surprise. So try to get one of these more squatty ones. They don't tip as well and they're nice. And one of these is nice if you lose your lighter, which I always seem to do. And the most important piece of equipment, the can of lard. Everybody has to have a can of lard. Never use water to quench your tools. If you've got a really hot piece of steel and you want to get it quenched, don't use water. If you do, you'll crack the steel or at least put a stress in it. Instead, right into the lard. Where do you get the lard? The average hardware store doesn't carry it. You have to go to your supermarket. Everybody should have a can of lard. So to summarize, we have feeler stock, wire round stock, stones, a dresser for dressing your grinding wheel, a micrometer, various die files, the scriber you can see there, There's also a carrying case that will show you how to make. Lighter for the torch, the protractor. That's a piece of veneer that we use for making handles, and the torch, and of course the can of lard. Time to get to work. First thing you have to do is polish the stock. This is emery cloth. It comes in a variety of grits. I use a 220 grit. You don't want to use a heavier grit or it's going to scratch the stock. And it's, just as the name implies, cloth, so you can tear off a strip of it and polish the stock. Now, if your stock is pretty new, if it hasn't been on the shelf too long, it should be just fine, but this has been hanging around a little while. It's got a little rust on it, just a touch. So I'm just going to fine it up a little bit. 220 grit isn't going to cut into the stock that much anyway, so you can do as much rubbing as you want without any fear of marking the stock. But you want to do your polishing now, because once we put the layout die on, you can't polish it anymore. Okay, I'm almost set. Just a little bit more. See how it feels. Okay. The layout die, never do this. You put air in the die, it'll spatter. Let the ball roll around in the bottom of the spray can. Hear it roll. Just about set to go. Waste your first shot. Don't put it on the die. Or rather, don't put the die on immediately. Let the first bit go out. We want a light coating, not too much, just a light coating. Very light. Just a touch. The layout die doesn't take long to dry, a minute, 2 minutes. Now that it's dry, we want to start marking layout lines on this shim stock. And to do that, we need the key from the lock or the lock series that we're projecting a pick for. The first thing we measure on the key is the length from the tip of the key to the stop. Just about all the lock manufacturers will have a stop somewhere on the key so that when the key is inserted into the keyway, it will go in just so far, and the cuts, bitting cuts in the key, will line up accurately with the pin tumblers. So once you've located that stop cut on the key, put the end of your rule into it, line up the bow tip with the bottom of the gauge, and tighten that nut down so it won't move. Then we take this measurement and transfer it over to the steel. Butting up the two edges. This is my carbide scriber, and I angle in towards the rule and to make my line. It doesn't have to be a thick line. You may not be able to see it on the camera. Go along, do all the way across. You may not be able to see it, but as I hold it up to the light, it shows very easily. It's readily apparent. And if I were to take the layout die off, I'd probably find that I didn't scratch it into the steel. But the die makes it a lot easier to see. And when you hold it up to the light, move a little bit, there's your layout line. Next step, loosen the marking gauge. And we'll want to measure on this key the depth of the bitting and find out just how high our lockpick bit can go without bumping on an adjacent pin. I'll explain that. If my lockpick is down here, the top of the lockpick is right up to this key cut line, and I'm trying to pick this pin 2 stations over. This one's already picked. I'm trying to pick this one. If I bump that up with the lockpick shank, not the working end, but the shank that's down here, I'll unpick that lock and I won't be able to get into the lock. So I want to measure on this key, and this is a good key for it because it's got a low cut and then a very high cut. We'll want to measure the distance between the lowest cut and the highest cut. And that's done with this same measuring tool. It's going to be pretty small distance. If you can see, and I'm getting it down, I need just a little bit more. You almost have to set the gauge by hand, tighten it, and then try it. Let's see what we got. Okay, that looks pretty good. You don't have to read on the rule how deep that is. All you have to know is that that's the depth between the lowest cut on the pin, on the key rather, and the highest cut on the key. Then you transfer that measurement over. You want to make sure that that's accurately lined up. Scribe it. Move it over. Scribe it. If you're very good, you can hold it and scribe it just like that. Now I'm going to take that dimension and double it. So now we do need to read the rule, and it looks to be a little more than 3/32. So I'll double that and make it 6/32. Lock the nut down tight. Scribe your second line. Again, you may not be able to see the layout lines on the tape, but they're really apparent to me. And if you move it in the light, they'll show up very nicely. You can also see where I made a mistake here. That's a little bit fat, but you can take care of that in the grinding process. Now we do the exact same thing to the other end of the stock. I'm making two tools simultaneously. First line. Now I'll line that back up again to make the second line. If you hold it like this, you can pull down with your fingers on the gauge, and that lines it up pretty well. The precision that I'm doing this marking with is not too accurate. It's not too high of a precision, rather. But that doesn't matter. We're just getting rough grinding guidelines, which we can later refine by fine grinding or filing while we try out the pick in an actual lock. So I've measured bow to tip. Now we're going to do that once more to get the other end of the lock pick. We're making two picks, one on each end of the stock. So let me remeasure a little bit more. Remeasure, set it, lock it. Now I'm doing the same thing. I'm measuring the working area of the lock pick from the bow of the key to the key stop. Here's the marked shim stock. The center I just marked roughly with my scriber. We're going to start grinding, but before we grind, the absolute most important thing that I can tell you, the biggest problem that you will have in grinding a pick is heat buildup. This finely tempered steel was produced at many thousands of man-hours and brought to you in its finished state. It will take you roughly 4 seconds to overgrind the stock and ruin the pick. If you overgrind it, you'll start to see this lovely blue color spreading on the back of the pick. Wherever you see blue, the stock will be untempered and it will just sag and bend in the lock. You won't be able to get any feel at all. It'll be gone. It'll be garbage. Throw it away. You could expend 20 minutes grinding a pick, get down to the last half of a thousandth of an inch, grind it too much, make it too hot, wait too long before quenching it, and you have to start all over again. So quench, grind, quench, grind. You can use a definite rhythm. You can grind to Beethoven's Ninth Overture. You can grind to the Rolling Stones. You may have a personal favorite that you like to grind to. Me, I just grind to whatever on the radio, but I always keep a rhythm up. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. The closer you get to the finished grind, the more you need to quench. The more steel you remove, the less steel there is to absorb the heat. And the heat will sit there and overload at the grinding point, and you'll have problems. Don't write to me if you start grinding steel picks, and you overgrind and you ruin the pick, because I can't help you. We're going to start the wheel up now. And you notice I've got my helmet on. Keep up the rhythm. Let me stop for a second and explain where I'm grinding. You remember we did the bow to tip measurement and scribed that line on the stock. I'm starting my grind right down there. So I'm grinding on this side of that line. And what I'm trying to do is grind down to that first line, which would be the second line up from the bottom. It is the first line that's closest to me as I'm coming down grinding. We're just trying to get to that point now. Don't linger and admire the grind. Okay, we've cut the film because I've been grinding for a good 3 or 4 minutes, which still isn't too bad. When you're first practicing, I expect you to take at least 10 minutes. I want to see the pick in the water most of the time and at the wheel only occasionally. But I've just about got it down to that first layout line. And as you can see, we've cut down to the first layout line. It didn't really take that long, as I said, about 4 minutes. And now I'm going to go back and lay out the end of the pick that we want to use for this particular pick. Whether it's going to be a diamond pick, a rake pick, a lifter pick, a ball pick, or even a snake pick. We've just got done cutting the pick down to the first layout line, and I thought I'd stop briefly and explain some of the terms that I used. I referred to a snake pick, a ball pick, a diamond pick. I've set out 2 examples of finish picks. These are the 2 main families. This is a diamond pick, also referred to as a rake pick in some circles, and this is a lifter pick, which is unfortunately also referred to as a rake in some circles, so it's difficult to tell what you're dealing with, but I prefer to call this a lifter, and this is a diamond pick. You can get the diamond pick with a half round ball instead of this pyramid shape. You can also get a full round ball. You can get a pick with 2 half balls or semicircles or 2 full balls. There are a lot of novel outlines available in a rake pick, but after having extensively used all of the different types, I find that I prefer just a straight half round diamond like that. If I need to work a lock where there are tumblers on this side and on the other side, in other words a double bitted key, I'll just flop my pick over and work the other halves of the tumblers. In most cases anyway, a double bitted key will have one set of tumblers that both bits operate, so you can just pick one half and the lock will be automatically picked. If you have to use a pick that has a complex contour, in other words 2 or more peaks or bends, we refer to that as a snake pick. And I'll cut one of those later on to show you how they look. But briefly, the snake pick attempts to duplicate a contour that a standard key would duplicate. Since you don't know what contour the key is, or you could just take the key and open the lock, you have to attempt to come up with a contour that would closely match what the average key might be. And when I'm building snake picks, instead of cutting them out of flat stock, I usually bend them out of wire and then lightly dress the edges or the sides of the wire so as to allow that wire to go into the keyway. Bending a snake pick instead of cutting one is a lot easier, and you can also change the bend slightly. If you feel your snake pick is just about working but not quite, you can bend it a little bit. We talked a little bit about lockpick design. What I'm doing now is superimposing a finished lockpick on a key to give you an idea what I mean by designing a pick that will match a particular lock. Obviously, if you had the key contour and you knew what it was, you could merely take it in and have a duplicate key made, and then you'd have a lockpick of sorts. You'd have a duplicate key, which is the best lockpick possible. But you can't do that for most locks. So what we do with a lockpick is attempt to simulate the action of the key by using a tool that matches the rough contours of a key. That's why we measure an actual key to produce a lockpick. If the key that we're measuring has a bow to throat distance of X, whatever it is, then when we cut our lockpick to match that, we know that that lockpick will fit that key as far as depth goes. And if we can further measure the angles on the key and match the lockpick so that the angle on the lockpick matches the angle on the key, our chances of opening the lock are just that much greater. Now we're ready to cut the final pick, and to do that we need to make one more measurement on the key. We've already measured from the throat to the tip, and we've measured the distance between the highest cut on our sample key and the lowest cut on our sample key, which will give us a good average of how the key works in the lock. The final measurement is the angle at the end. And I've got my protractor. I align it to the throat again, or actually align it to the top of the bitting. And then I align the movable blade of the protractor to match. And if I want to, I can read it off here. You don't need to read it. You can use this to do the final layout line scribing. But I can read it, and it's reading about 40 degrees, which is what the average attack angle will be on a key. So we can make a 40-degree angle, and then I can reverse it to make the other half of the diamond when I'm laying the diamond out on the stock. The stock is right here. I've got my scriber here, and I'm laying out the angle. Superimposing like this. And now I make my scribing mark right in there. There should still be enough layout die left on for you to see the mark, and if you tilt it in the light, you can't see it on the video, but I can see it tilting it in the light. Notice that I'm not going all the way down to make a point as my diamond pick is. The diamond pick has a point right on the end here. We're not going that far down yet. We're just scribing our layout line. Now we want to do the reverse layout line to complete the diamond. So I bring it up, line it up, hold it. Here's my scriber, and I mark. There we go. Now I've laid out the diamond with the correct angle that we made by measuring the key on the end of the pick here. What we're going to do now is go to the grinding wheel for the last time, and I'm going to grind in this area down to the second layout line, and then grind the diamond end like this. Obviously we're back at the grinding wheel. I'm going to finish the end of the diamond first by cutting that point off right to the layout line. Heat buildup here is going to be critical because there's very little stock at the end to absorb heat, so I'm going to have to quench even more frequently. If you were using quenching music like Beethoven, you might want to switch to the Rolling Stones right now because the pace gets a little more fast and furious. Now if I should happen to burn the pick at this point, just a trifle, I can live with that, because I'm not in a very critical shank area. The shank will bend, the end of the pick will never bend, even if it's burnt. But try not to burn anyway, it's just bad practice. And there we go. Now we're going to cut in this area here. I'm going to nip this edge off here just a little bit to give me some access for the grinding wheel. There are no layout lines in the area of the pick where I'm grinding now. I'm just doing this by hand. Just leave yourself a little bit of a relief cut so that when you do the final shank thinning, you don't have the edge catch on the wheel. At this point, you might be tempted to grind on the side of the wheel. Don't do that. Grinding on the wheel puts pressure on the wheel this way, and if the wheel is going to break, it absolutely will. So grind on the face of the wheel only. Now we're ready to do our final cut in this area. This is where it gets critical. What I'm doing now is cutting down to the finished shank. You'll notice I've got very little material here on the pick. I'm almost out of steel. So the heat buildup will be enormous, and there's no place for the heat to go. It can't travel back into the rest of the stock because there's this very narrow bottleneck here. The heat cannot get through that bottleneck, so it will tend to overheat, and you've got to watch for that. You may get tired of hearing me say, don't overheat the pick, but it's very important. If you overheat your pick, the shank will bend in this area, and you'll never get the locks open. Notice I'm removing only a touch of material at a time. With my bare hand, I can feel the heat build up. When it gets hot enough so I can't stand it, then I know I'm well overheated on the face where I'm grinding. So I always quench at that point and quench immediately. Now if I was working on the other end, I've got the other end laid out. I could grind here, put it in, grind there, put it in, and trade off. Another technique that you might try is to lay out two pieces and keep one in the water while you're grinding one, and then just switch over. So I'd be grinding this one, and I put it in the water and take this one out, grind this one, put it in the water, and so on. That way you'll avoid heat buildup in this critical final area. This is the pick to this point. We're almost done with the grinding. What I'm going to do now is pick up the micrometer and measure the shank to see how thin it is. I've just been grinding by eye. Now I want to do a little measuring to see how thin the shank is. Okay, measure it here too. It's probably about the same, a little thinner. And now I'll take the protractor and I'll verify that the angle on the end of the pick is still correct. Like I said, I've been grinding by eye, so I don't really know how accurate it is. If you can't read the protractor in the pick like this, just use the old trick of holding it up to the light. You can easily see if the two angles match perfectly. If not, you can do the correction by grinding on the wheel, or if you don't feel that your control of the wheel is that accurate yet, you can do it in the filing stage, which is coming up immediately. The last grinding that we have to do is to grind the inside contour of the pick, the other half of the diamond. Also notice that when I measured the shank of the pick, I didn't tell you what the measurement is. The measurement will vary from pick to pick. You can use a little bit of brinksmanship, as a matter of fact. How thin do you want to make the shank? If you make it too thin, the pick will bend as you're working it in the lock, and you won't be able to work effectively. If you make the shank too thick, however, it may bind in the keyway. There may be just too much pick to get effective access to the keyway. So you come up with a good working average based on a pick that you've ground before and has a good feel to it, but it doesn't bend, and try to duplicate that micrometer reading on one of your favorite picks on all of the picks that you grind after that. I'm just finishing up the inside of the diamond now. Now let's look at the two diamonds. Here's the one that I've just ground, the inside, and here is a finished diamond pick. They're still not the same size. Notice that the diamond on this one is much higher than the diamond here. If I take my micrometer and measure diamond height, obviously you can tell by eye as well as measuring it, there's quite a bit of difference. You should not grind any more, however, on the inside edge of the diamond. To get the right diamond height, grind on the outside edge. There's enough steel there as you'll ever need. You can keep grinding and grinding and checking with the micrometer, grind, check, until you get the diamond height that you want. You remember when we measured the key, we measured the difference between the lowest cut and the highest cut and put a layout line there. You can make that more accurate by doing this diamond height measurement. We want the diamond height that will produce just the right pin displacement between the two. So I'm going to go to the wheel now and grind this diamond down until it matches this one in height. I'm going to stop the grind right here and hold up the two picks again so you can compare. It may not be perfect or in its finished form now, but that's good enough for the wheel. I prefer to do most of my grinding on the grinding wheel and do file finishing only very briefly, but since you're learning to build picks, you'll probably want to grind only down to the rough outlines and then do a lot of file finishing by hand. The advantage of file finishing is that there's less heat buildup and you can go slowly and examine your work as you go along. So let's take this pick over to the bench vise now. We'll do a little filing on it, and then we'll do some stoning on this pick, and that will be done. As you can see, I've got the pick clamped very close in, so there's very little movement of the pick. I'm going to start filing now with one of the die files. I'll start with the square file. First, I'll take off the debris that was left by the grinding wheel. If you already haven't taken that off by running your fingers over it and getting a nice sliver caught in your finger, you want to remove that. There'll be none on the bottom. There'll be some on the diamond. This is just rough work right now. Now I'll switch to the round file. I want to put a very small radius in here for the pin to glide over. If the transition is too abrupt, you'll cause jarring if you're using this pick to pull in and out of the lock, referred to as raking the lock. So we want to file just a small radius in there to provide an abrupt, or rather a gradual, you don't want an abrupt, a gradual transition for the pin tumbler end. Going back to the flat again, I'm filing more of the grinding marks at this point now than I'm really filing the actual material of the pick. Now I'm doing the shank with the flat file. Try not to dig into that nice radius that you've just filed there. And remember to keep it square, not off to one side, just to smooth it up a little bit. Now I'm going to change the position of the pick slightly, get it a little farther out, and I'm going to file the rough grinding dross off where we did our relief radius on the other end of the pick. Feels pretty good. And now finally I'm going to put a small radius on this side too. The pin won't contact this radius. I'm doing that more for strain relief and to give myself a good termination point. Just a little bit of a radius. Doesn't take much. Of course, if you file too deep at this point, that's another fatal error. The shank will bend again if you file and reduce the strength, and the pick won't work well. Now we take back to the square pick again, or the flat-sided pick, and I'm filing along the length of the top. This is called draw filing. I'm not moving the pick back and forth. I'm moving it in and out across the length of the pick rather. I'll do that on the very tip too. Now I'm not going to touch the bottom edge at all. That was the original finished edge of the stock, and that's fine. It's already been polished. Leave it alone. Now I just want to touch up the radius just a little bit. And the final step in filing is to put a small flat on the diamond, right on the top with my flat file. I'm going to hold it with my finger and just file a very small flat. You can barely see it, but if you look at the top of the diamond, you won't see the top of the diamond before you start filing. File until you can just barely see the top of the diamond. There'll be a little square there, or a rectangle. Don't file too much, because if you do, you'll lower the height of the diamond, and the pick will then not match the lock type that you're trying to match. But we've filed here, taken away the dross. We've filed in the inner edge of the diamond here, a small radius. And we filed a small radius here too. And then we have draw filed the top edge and the top of the diamond to make it smooth, and left the bottom edge alone. The final procedure in getting your pick finished is stoning. This is really where a custom lock pick is much better than the standard issue commercial pick. Standard issue commercial picks are too rough for words. They've got too many hard edges, and if you use your fingernail, you notice that you still have a little bit of a hard edge even on your custom ground pick, but now we're going to stone it. This is a fairly new stone, as you can see, and it's pretty thirsty. You want to put a lot of oil on. Oil keeps the particles that you're going to be abrading off of the pick from getting embedded in the stone surface. The oil floats the particles away. I'm starting on a 45-degree angle, and I'm finishing that edge that I told you not to file. You shouldn't file it, but you can stone it. That'll make it a little smoother than it is, even from the factory. It doesn't take much. Keep it on the 45. Maybe 20 strokes. Don't be afraid to use the oil. Now we switch, go to the other 45-degree angle. I'm holding my finger on the pick so that this end digs in. If I wasn't holding it, it would just float above and you wouldn't get an even edge. Okay, 45 degree, 15 strokes, 20, 10. Who's counting? Feel. You should be able to detect the difference. Now we're going to the outer edge of the diamond, again on a 45-degree angle. Notice the difference. That's really rough on that edge. See the stones skip around? That's one of your better indications of smoothness too. As the stones skip a lot, if so, you've got a rough edge. We'll go to the other 45, outside edge of the diamond on a 45-degree angle. Make sure you're hitting all points of the diamond and you don't have the edge riding up like that. Sometimes you can feel it better even with one hand. If you get better control with an out push only or an in pull only, use whatever works for you. Okay, we've done both out edges of the diamond. At this point, we have to switch to the India slip gouge, which is going to be a little more kinder to me on the oil, I think. If you get a new stone and you don't want to fool around with squirting oil on it every 3 seconds, you can just buy a quart of motor oil and literally submerge the stone right in the motor oil. Put a little gas in with it to transport it in, give it overnight, and then it'll be fine. Or you can buy pre-oil filled stones too. Okay, we're stoning the inside edge of the pick. As much water as you got on your hands when you were doing the grinding, now you're going to get oil on. I'm stoning the 45-degree angle inside edge of the shank, and here again too. You can see a little white line develop on the pick as you stone it. That means you're taking some material away. And I'm saving the worst job for last. That's the inner edge of the diamond. This is your critical working area, so it must be smooth, which is really why we're doing the stoning in the first place. Most India stones, when you get them new, will have a very sharp knife edge, and I'm using that to take away that wire edge that even the filing will leave. Always on a 45. In other words, when I get done with the pick, it will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different facets. It's like a gem. You see the white line developing as I abrade material away from the pick? And I can stone a little bit on the top edge. You can stone a little bit on the outer edge if you wish. Like that. I feel like a manicurist. I'm getting the job done though. It's getting smoother. You can feel it with your fingers. At this point, there are no steel splinters on the tool, so you can easily move your fingers around without a lot of problem. And now, back to my hungry oil stone. We do the face. Don't do it crossways like this. Your pick doesn't work in the lock crossways. It works in and out. If you were to stone the face of the pick enough, you'd lose the 45-degree angle that you created here. But in reality, that'll never happen. If it feels gritty, put a little more oil on. Holding down, one face, two face. At this point, your pick is far better than any commercial brand pick will ever be. We're just about done with the stoning. Stoning is like sharpening a knife. If you like your knives real sharp, you can do it for a couple hours, get that little extra edge. You can stone a pick for as long as you want to. Minimum 20 strokes, but if you want to spend an hour on it, that's fine. It's good therapy. And I think we're all done. What you're looking at now is called a snake pick. Unlike the single diamond or the ball picks that simulate only one part of the key, the snake pick is meant to simulate 2, 3, or even 4 of the bidding cuts on a standard key. Where the snake pick would be useful is in picking an automotive lock with a sidebar. As you may know, as you insert the pick into a lock and attempt to lift pins up using the tension wrench to hold the core, the sidebar prevents you from using any tension wrench at all. It won't work. The sidebar is locking it. So you have to lift all 5 of the tumblers to approximately their precise position with one pick motion, or it won't turn. That's where the snake pick is invaluable. Any contour that you think might be effective can be tried. Some people have a particular contour that they feel comfortable with. Some people use 3 or 4. One gentleman in the industry has 2 picks that he calls the king and the queen. And if the king won't work, then the queen will. If the queen won't work, the king will. I generally like to make it 1, 2, 3, 4, no more stations on the pick. And you can literally grind it freehand to whatever contour you like. Since this is a more complicated profile, there are a lot more hills and valleys, you'll want to do a lot more file finishing. So just do a very rough grind on a snake pick, and then take your double cut pippin file and do most of the finishing in the vise and extensive stoning, because you'll end up with a lot of rough steel on a snake pick. Now notice I've cut this particular pick so that when you move it into the lock, here we'll show a lock here, although this is not a sidebar lock, this pick is cut so that when you move it into the lock, the handle is at a little bit of an angle. This is because, as with the snake pick, you are literally using the pick as both a tension wrench and a pin manipulator. So you have to be able to have a little more purchase, and it seems like a straight handle won't give you that. So if it's down like this, it's easier to manipulate. So I always cut these with just a little bit of an angle to the handle. Now we're ready to actually cut the pick in half. Before we do that, I'd like to briefly explain why I cut 2 picks at once. The answer is simple. I've got a longer stock to work with. I've got extra handle right here. You should never cut your stock to the finished pick length and then grind it on the wheel. It's just too difficult to do. Keep it married together until you've got both pick ends cut and you're ready to part it in the middle. Now, if you don't want to attempt this, if you don't have an anvil or a chisel or whatever, you can grind on the face of the pick. Remember we scribed our center line there? Just grind there. You can even burn it a little bit if you want. It won't matter at that point until you can bend it back and forth, break it, and then finish the edge up to make it a nice smooth handle. But I found a much more effective way of doing that. If we tape this pick down, leaving the cut area free, this is a common steel cold chisel. I've sharpened it a little bit more than it usually is. But we put that on the cut line. All it takes is 1 good tap. All it takes is 2 good taps. There we go. Saves a lot of grinding time. A little bit of a wire edge. Finish that off on the grinding wheel. And you've got 2 completed, ready to use picks. Now we're ready to do a tension wrench, and you have to learn a little bit about torches and torch safety. Actually, there's only one rule that you must learn. When you turn the torch on, here's the gas, here's my spark igniter, okay? You might not be able to see it on the video now, but I've got a pretty good flame going here. It's not going to kill you. It's not that hot unless you leave your hand in it for a long period of time. When you turn the torch off, listen. Okay, it went pop. That means it really stopped. If it doesn't go pop, you've got to turn the gate valve on a little tighter to make sure all the gas is gone. Otherwise, you're going to have a potentially serious problem. So just listen for the pop when you turn it off. We'll light it up again. This is the music wire rod stock. What I want to do is hold this in the cone of the flame, the hottest part. I'm seeing blue already on the wire stock. It's hot. It's not going to kill you though. Well, maybe. And then you can start to bend it. It's turning cherry now. There's my right angle. Just a little bit more. You don't need a lot of heat. Listen for the pop. Here's the proverbial can of lard. See the smoke coming out? The lard makes an effective quenching medium. It's a lot better to use, as I said before, than water is. Now that you've got a right angle ground into the wire, notice it's not warm anymore. The quench took all of the heat out of it. You can, if you want to, go immediately to the grinding wheel. And now I'll show you why we cut, or rather why we bent a right angle in the rod. Doing it this way, I can hold the rod parallel to the table of the workbench, make my first flat cut on the wire, and then to cut the other parallel, I just reverse the angle. That way I know that I'm exactly parallel. If I'm exactly parallel to the table, I'm exactly parallel on the cut as well. If you want to burn the steel a little bit, it's okay. You don't need a lot of strength in that part of the tension wrench tip. So if you want to save a little time, quench it a little less often, go right ahead. You'll want to have the, just a second if I can find it, you want to have a keyway handy to test the insertion of the tension wrench. Now it's starting to go in a little way already. Matter of fact, it's stuck. We'll want to cut just a little bit more. You don't want to leave your tool stuck in the keyway. That's bad form. Another cut on this side. Turn it around, make it parallel with the bench top. Another cut on that side. Try it in the keyway again. Okay, it's going in a little farther that time. One more cut. I'm seeing blue on the tension wrench. That means I'm burning the stock. But it doesn't matter because it's very strong at that cross section anyway. Quench it. And let's try it once more. Okay, we've got a good fit in that keyway. Now if I was using the American system, or if I preferred a looser feel, then I would grind this down even more, and it would be a loose fit in the keyway. If I grind it down much more, though, I don't want to burn the steel, so I'm going to have to quench a little more. So if you're just making a rough and ready, tight-fitting tension wrench, you can grind it until it's real hot and it won't bother it. Now we've completed the grinding. There are two parallel flats on the tension wrench. I'm going to put the bend back in the flame. It's getting warm now. I can almost see the cherry color. Okay, we want it back out straight. Notice I can get it almost perfectly straight again. Now I want to do a quench on that. More to save my fingers than anything else, because now I'm going to take the tension wrench and heat it up at the very end, very close to where the flats are. Now I'm going to go down to the bench top once I get the cherry color, and I'm going to make my final bend against the bench top. It's got to be pretty hot for it to bend that easily. So we'll leave in the torch a little longer. Okay, I'm getting a dull cherry. Now I'm getting a bright cherry. That's about as hot as the torch will go. Down to the bench top. And as you see, I've completed the bend. Then we quench in the bucket of lard. Here are 4 finished picks created in my own workshop, and they are far superior to any commercial quality pick that you might buy. These picks will never bend, never break unless you misuse them. Starting from left to right, we have the tension wrench that we just cut. I'm going to put that one down. We have the diamond that we cut earlier in the video. Here's the snake pick that we've just cut. And finally the lifter. Now we didn't cut the lifter in the video, but it uses the same tools and techniques as you would to produce the diamond. And they're all four held in this case. I'm not a case maker, so I usually go down to the local leather store and pick up 2 or 3. As you can see, this is a comb kit. If you pick up 2 or 3, you can sandwich 2 or more of them together, and instead of one comb case, you've got a nice handy pick case. If you can get leather, it's better. If you use anything else, the high quality steel that the picks are produced from will rust if you hold them in close proximity to your body. So try to put them in a case. And now we come to the moment of truth. We're going to use the picks that we've created in the filming of this video to try to bypass a lock. I have the tension wrench that we've cut. That goes in the keyway here. Notice it's kind of a loose fit. And here's the rake pick that we've also cut during the filming of the video. What I'm going to do is apply a small amount of tension or turning force to the movable part of the lock we call the core, the plug, or the cylinder. The small amount of tension will hold any pin that's pushed up to its correct height from falling back down again. The key here is a very small amount of tension, but the right amount of tension. Then as the diamond pick rakes over the ends of each pin tumbler, it will lift them to the correct position. The small amount of tension on the core will hold them, and when all the pins have been lifted to their correct height, the lock will turn and it will be effectively picked. I'm going to try that now using the tools we just created here. There we go. Notice the plug is turning. See it going around? That lock is unlocked all the way around, and back down locked again. We've just picked this lock with an Eddie the Wire professional tool.